Sahil, my question is, will today's events have any impact on the security protocols for Congress?
Joe, that's a discussion that I think will be ongoing. I spoke to Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, earlier today, who suspected there may be some security changes in the near future. But at the end of the day, congressmen are pretty well protected, and the security protocols, at least around the Capitol complex, remain strong, and there's not cause for concern there. Members did have a briefing by the Sergeant at Arms earlier today, and I think some of those issues came up. But the remarkable thing here, Joe, is that outside the Capitol complex, lawmakers tend not to have protection with them unless they are high-ranking individuals. If not for the fact that Steve Scalise, the majority whip, who was shot and injured today, was there, the Capitol Police may not have been there at all, and it's kind of horrifying to imagine what would have happened then.
Today was not a normal day in Washington, clearly, even as the Federal Reserve moved on with its news conference to conclude its two-day meeting. But Sahil, I wonder, to what extent do we know whether things will go back to normal tomorrow? For instance, is the congressional baseball game that the Republican congressmen were practicing for still slated to continue or take place?
It is slated to continue. It's going to take place. Members who are participating are sort of taking this in stride and saying it's going to be an event not only for charity, as it was initially always intended to be, but they're going to honor the victims, of today's shooting in that event as well. So it's going to happen. And as far as changes to the congressional schedule, we know that the House has changed its schedule. There were no votes today, and there were only those speeches that we heard from a little bit earlier from Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi. There are going to be no votes in the House on Friday. They've canceled those as well. The Senate, however, seems to be proceeding as it was initially before the shooting.
Sahil, what are people saying in D.C. about this? Because the suspect involved allegedly asked whether or not those that were playing the baseball game were Republicans or Democrats. There's suggestions that his social media profile was particularly anti-Republicans here. I just wonder, given the tensions that we've seen between the Democrats and the Republicans here, what people are saying.
So law enforcement officials and the FBI have not spoken about the motive, but yes, based on the social media postings, this does seem to be a figure on the political left. And while we know that President Trump and Democratic and Republican leaders in Congress are not politicizing this, there are those on the fringe who do want to politicize this, and I suspect that'll continue as it does every time there's a tragedy of this sort. Congressional leaders, as I mentioned, are not doing that, and hopefully that'll continue. There is a lot of talk about dialing down the rhetoric. We live in a very intense partisan climate, and there's always a fear that heated up rhetoric can lead people to do crazy things like this. So I think that's certainly going to be a conversation going forward. In terms of gun laws, that is, again, another debate that always happens after shootings like this. It was 6 years ago when a congresswoman was shot in the head. That did not change the debate surrounding gun laws at all. It's unlikely, based on what I've heard, that this will, but at the very least, there will be a debate about it. And interestingly enough, this week, the House was supposed to vote on a measure introduced by a Republican congressman to ease restrictions on silencer guns. It's not clear what the fate of that bill is right now.
So could you just give us some perspective here? Because obviously in the UK we've seen our own events and violence towards politicians. Just how rare is this? You just mentioned one case in particular.
Well, it's certainly rare. It's not unheard of. There was somewhere over 90 Americans get shot every day, according to statistics from the Brady campaign, which works to prevent gun violence. Gun violence is sort of a fact of life in the United States in a way that I think the rest of the developed world is shocked and appalled at. That is something that I think many lawmakers view as a cost of the freedoms in the Second Amendment. So, to the extent that there's going to be any fundamental change around that, it's unlikely that an event like this is going to change that. People, cherish the Second Amendment too much, I think, to make a major change to reduce the number of guns on the streets.